Now, the first in a series of exclusive ENC reports from the UK investigating issues around natural hair and the discrimination against Britain's Afro-Caribbean community. A race row over a London school's hair policy has erupted after a 12-year-old boy with dreadlocks was told to cut his hair or face suspension. The incident echoes similar cases seen here in South Africa, raising questions about whether some school uniform policies are discriminatory. ENCA's UK correspondent Natalie Powell has that exclusive story.
And are these certain characters?
To a big dragon.
We're at home with Chickasay Flanders. He's a budding artist, but on starting a new school in September, it was his hair that he was singled out for and not his drawing skills.
And the teacher came to me and said that by Monday my hair has to be cut. And then after that another teacher came and she said the same thing. And then on the following Monday, one of the teachers took me and they put me in isolation, and they gave me a Bible and questions, and I had to answer the questions.
The school handed out this punishment for breaking its uniform policy. Despite efforts to tie his hair up, dreadlocks and braids are described in the Fulham Boys' School appearance policy as cult haircuts, though dreadlocks only appear to have been added in sometime after the June 2016 policy review.
I feel like really sad, and when they put me in isolation, it made me feel like I've done something wrong.
His mother Tuesday argued that as Rastafari, dreadlocks are part of her family's religious beliefs, and demonstrators have been protesting outside the school gates, demanding an end to what they argue are discriminatory policies.
I feel someone needs to pinch me because I have other kids. I have 4 kids. And they all went to the school system with their dreadlocks. I have never had a problem with their dreadlocks. And to have a headmaster who say he is for equality, because I've brought up my kids to have respect for elders, and you took an innocent child and you isolated him, not once, not twice. You isolated him because of the color of his skin and because of his hair.
The school maintains that dreadlocks are against its uniform policy and refuses to recognise them as part of a religious belief. The boy, meanwhile, is attending another school now, and this protest has been organised to raise awareness of this issue. Natalie Powell, London.
Right, there you saw Natalie Powell, who's done that story for us, as we said, the first in a series of exclusive reports from the United Kingdom around the issue of natural hair. Well, Natalie actually joins us live to explore this issue a little further from London. In studio, we're also joined by founder of Afro-Botanics Ethnic Hair Care Products, Ndombentle Katwane, and Independent Schools Association of Southern Africa Executive Director Lebogang Montjane. We'll be speaking to both of you in just a moment. Welcome into studio. We're going to go first to the United Kingdom, where Natalie Powell is standing by for us right now. And Natalie is very sensitively handled indeed. It is a very controversial issue, we know, even from what's gone on here at home over the issue of ethnic hair. But it sounds like the family about whom you've told the story is genuinely traumatized by what's happened to their son.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you've got a 12-year-old boy who's started secondary school for the very first time, and within a matter of days, really, has had to leave that school because of its hair policy. Now, as you've seen from that report, the parents had tried to do everything they could to make sure that the hair was tidy. They put it up. They made sure that it was looking in line with the policy of the school uniform policy as much as possible. But in that school uniform policy, it does state that dreadlocks and braids are not part of that policy and they won't be accepted at the school. But it does go a step further to describe these as cult haircuts. Now, the argument, of course, from the mother of this 12-year-old boy is that this isn't a cult haircut. It's part of their religious beliefs. They are Rastafarians, and he should therefore be allowed to keep his hair that way. The school didn't agree with that, and it's now resulted in the boy having having to move schools to change schools. But the school itself really not backing down on this policy.
It sounds like this issue is also slightly unevenly handled, shall we say, because it sounds like three other children from this family have been through a similar schooling system, and there's never been a problem with their hair.
That's right. So they weren't actually attending this school. This is a fairly new school. And as you said, those other children haven't had this problem. And in fact, the school that Chickasee Flanders is currently in doesn't have that problem and certainly doesn't put that forward in its school uniform policy. But this particular school does. So it seems that across the board, there is not a uniform, shall we say, uniform policy here. It depends from school to school on what they choose to put in and to leave out of them. And that's really provoked a lot of people here in the UK to say that this particular school, well, its school uniform policy is discriminatory, particularly against ethnic minorities.
And Natalie, what's been the British public's reaction to this story?
Do you know what, Joanne? It's been a really interesting reaction here in the UK. This is probably the first story that's come out in this way, very publicly. I have spoken to a number of campaigners who say that other children have faced similar things in UK schools, but very often the parents will comply with these school uniform regulations and cut the child's hair, or they will simply not want to cause a big fuss. So this has really been one of the first publicly outspoken parents, really, that has come out fighting against a school uniform policy with regards to natural hair. And the response has been quite significant here in the UK. A lot of people are quite shocked by this. They're particularly shocked that this has happened in London. London prides itself as being a very multicultural city. So the fact that this is able to happen in this particular area has shocked many. But then on the other hand, you've got those who say, well, look, this is the school uniform policy. It is stated there pretty much in black and white. Interestingly, though, Joanne, this regulation has only been introduced recently. So the last update that we have where this was not put in there was in June 2016. So at some point after June 2016, the introduction of dreadlocks not being allowed as part of the school's uniform policy has been put in there. But yes, there are those other parents who say, well, school uniform policies are there to be abided by, and that is the policy that the school is putting forward. What they're not doing, however, is potentially taking into consideration that dreadlocks are believed to be part of their religious beliefs.
Natalie Powell, thanks so much for giving us a little bit more analysis on that story. Live to us from London there, our UK correspondent Natalie Powell. So many parallels with the kind of stories we've seen erupting here at home over ethnic hair. I'm going to start with you. Were we to transplant this British story into South Africa right now, what would the reaction at independent schools be to that kind of hairstyle that we just saw?
If we're to follow the facts as you mentioned, this would fall under basically the right to practice religious practice. And our Constitutional Court in the Durban High School for Girls case made it very clear that you have to make reasonable accommodation for children to practice their religious practice. But that case mattered specifically only for public schools. The question would be, would a religious school in an independent sector have to comply and make reasonable accommodation for children of different religious practices if that school is a religious school? But obviously, if it is not a religious school, obviously then the test that was set out by the South African Constitutional Court in a judgment written by Justice Langa would actually be applicable. So they would have to make reasonable accommodation.
So you're saying it depends on how the school religiously identifies itself, whether it's secular or whether it is a church school, for example?
Exactly.
So are you saying that a Christian school or a Jewish school or a Muslim school is then not subject to the Constitution when it comes to that aspect?
That is an interesting question. I mean, as ISASA, we are actually grappling with that question at the moment. We do not have any judgment that actually deals with this question in independent schools. We take guidance from what happens in public schools, but public schools have to be open to the public, as the name says. So that is what would make it a bit different in the case of independent schools.
So with whom does the power lie to decide this? Is it with the school governing body? Is it with the board at independent schools?
Within the school, school, within independent schools, yes. So in the SASA member schools, it would actually be the board and the governing body or whatever that may be to determine what the school uniform code is and to set it out very clearly, and also to make sure that the rules of the school are being communicated to potential parents and present parents.
Thank you so much for coming in, Ntombendle. I want to bring you into the conversation because you have dedicated your life's work to making Africans, whether they're children or adults, proud of their hair. How do these school rules sit with you?
They don't sit well at all. In the schools that my kids go to, I take it up all the time. But, you know, it goes back many steps. The fact that we still refer to African hair, natural hair, as ethnic hair is a problem because you're already still saying that we are a lower subgroup and we should be spoken to and dictated to on every level. And then when it comes to the issue of school uniform, there are things that you can uniformize and there are things that you can't. You cannot uniformize how we look, how we are naturally born looking. And the issue of trying to say how kids' hair should be is not just only in white schools, like Model C schools or private schools, also black schools, where they try to say that neatness, the standard of neatness is a certain way, forcing our children to relax their hair or to perm their hair. Whereas white kids are not allowed to dye their hair. They're not allowed to perm their hair until they finish high school. But our kids are encouraged to do so, just so that they fit into a certain mold of beauty or neatness or whatever standard that has been set for years. It is very discriminatory, it is racist undertone, and it needs to come to an end. And I encourage all parents, it doesn't matter private school, public school, to always take it up and to push for the change of the uniform code and to take it up to constitutional court if we have to. It's unacceptable that till this day we are dealing with the issue of being judged by how we were naturally born.
I want to ask you, because you say this is a battle you're fighting all the time. On what fronts are you fighting this battle, and what are some of the examples of the difficulties you've experienced at your children's schools?
So luckily my kids are still in, so I've got a kid who's in university at UCT, so she went through a private school where they had those issues. So the private school didn't have a problem with my child wearing Indian hair extensions, weaves, but they had a problem with her having her natural hair out, because obviously if she has her hair out, it looks really, you know, bushy. It's unfamiliar to most people. It looks almost like dreadlocks. They felt that that wasn't neat. It wasn't presentable. But they had no problem with her wearing straight weaves, which is something they shouldn't allow, because they wouldn't allow a white child to wear extensions in her hair. So I fought that battle at Penryn College in Nelspruit, and they changed the school rules. Children are allowed to go to school, natural hair, weave, or whatever the case may be. My children are in preschool right now, and I was so proud to see recently at a concert that almost 80% of the children still have their natural hair. But I know that should they go to primary school, and for different pressures, they'll be forced to either always have their hair in braids or have to straighten their hair. And that will be unacceptable to me. I personally won't allow my child to be forced into that situation. And as a parent, it doesn't just only extend to how the children, like school uniform policy, but also to just things like, you know, representation amongst teachers, diversity. Do schools have enough black teachers at schools? All of those things impact how your child would be affected as an adult, and race will have an impact on him, on her. So we need to take it up as parents, regardless of what school you're in, private school or public.
There's some very interesting comments there from Ntombendle. I want to ask you about the question of natural pride as an African person. We're talking about this issue of decolonization. We're talking about restoring pride in ourselves as Africans, but particularly for the black African who's been downtrodden for so many centuries and taught that he or she is inferior. Isn't it important that we start grappling with this legislation that polices African hair in the way it does?
I would fully agree with Ntombendle on that point, is that ultimately is that we've got to look at diversity. And I think that we as ISASA say we talk about quality, values and diversity. And you have to comply with those three things. But you cannot be a quality school if you're not diverse, and you cannot be a quality school if you've got no values. And it is important when we look at our constitution, as we say in ISASA, that we've got to actively seek to apply the constitution within our schools. And that is something that we as ISASA encourage all our member schools to comply with. And part of that, obviously, is to familiarize yourself with the types of students that are in our school and to understand who they are, and that you should not have a uniform aesthetic of this is how people ought to look. But obviously, school uniforms, and many of our schools are quite traditional. But within ISASA, we've also got schools that don't have school uniform. So those parents must also find those schools that actually fit their children.
But is that a fair statement? I mean, if I want my child, I've got a boy who wants to go to St. John's for argument's sake, or to St. Stithians, or whatever the case may be. Why should I have to choose a school that will accept the way he is, the way he looks, his hair and so forth? Should you not be harder on your members and say, this is the law, this is what the Constitution says, and this is what you're going to do as a result of it?
Look, I'm very much about, the point is, schools should really be careful about making comment about people and aesthetic, or what is a standard of beauty, what is a standard of what is acceptable or not acceptable. And that's why I started my argument talking about we need to familiarize ourselves with the communities that we have. And I think that that is really the overriding thing. So also, as I've said to our member schools at ISASA, do not say and make a reason that you do something because it's tradition. You must actually have a good reason for why you require different rules. So when I'm talking about neatness and school uniforms, as I'm saying, actually there is a benefit to having children be neat and focus on what they're at school for. And as we knew, there was a ridiculous argument that students were on strike at a public school because they wanted to wear skinny jeans or some kind of things. You're there to actually make sure that you're getting an education. So some schools believe, and not all, that having uniforms, having codes of conduct on hair is quite important. Some schools actually say, uniform is not important to us. How you look on your hair is not important to us. What matters is what you actually think and how you actually apply your mind. So there are different types of schools who come, and you can get to that end in many different ways. So what we're saying is comply with the Constitution. That is something that we fully do say at ISASA. Comply with the Constitution, be embracing of diversity and that standard. I mean, Domentle, she specializes in hair. So I mean, obviously says, there's these absurd notions that, if you wear, if you have synthetic hair or hair that's not yours, that's acceptable, but when you have your own hair, it's not acceptable. So those are the kinds of important debates, I think, that she's just raised that schools must have. What are we asking our students? What is important? What's not important? But I think that the British case was really about this child is a Rastafari. So if this child believes in Rastafari and that requires dreadlocks, you need to actually accommodate that religious practice.
I want to end with you here, and Ntombenhle. Is the issue of tradition merely a way of preserving racism, preserving what are the dominant notions of beauty, or is tradition something you need to respect if you're going into a school with a long-standing history and this is the way things have always been done?
Whose tradition? And, especially in the world we live in now, not just the country, the world we live in. But more importantly, there are other things that have changed according to tradition. For instance, the way we discipline our kids or punish our kids. Corporal punishment used to be the norm, used to be the tradition. It no longer is. There are certain things that used to be that aren't. So why is it not the same when it comes to how black children look? And importantly, in South Africa or in the UK, it perpetuates a next generation of racist young kids, not just black kids who don't feel good about themselves, but white kids who think black kids are dirty. Because we've got schools in South Africa that still check whether kids have lice in their hair because they have natural hair or they have braids. Lebogang was talking earlier with his assistant about kids who have to go undergo the swimming cap test. Swimming cap test. Like, most of our hair doesn't fit into a traditional swimming cap. So all of those things need to change. Like, we've moved with times. Tradition changes. Tradition is not stagnant. And whose tradition is it? We can't have a hegemony over tradition anymore. We need to embrace diversity as a tradition.
I want to ask you, because you're dealing directly with children who are using your hair products.
Yeah.
How important or how successful are you at instilling a notion of black beauty in children that they can be proud of? Or do you feel that these current systems are working against what you're trying to do?
I feel there's been so much progress. Like, for instance, what our tagline for my business are beautifully made, because we have to stop getting children to aspire to a certain perfect standard of anything for that matter, and they should focus on being these great human beings, finding their talents, honing their talents. So there is no perfect standard to go towards. And we also speak about my own kind of beautiful, because you are your own kind of beautiful. There is no way I can ever look like Beyonce. Even if I was skinny like her, I will never look like her, and I shouldn't aspire to be that. I should aspire to be the best version of myself. So that's the way we are approaching things, and it's amazing. Like, I'm seeing so many women choosing to keep their children natural, and those children will at least grow up and not have issues around how they look. We were talking earlier about Bantu lips. When I was a kid, a teacher told me that your lips are too thick. So I remember, if you look at my pictures in grades 6 and 7, all my pictures are like this. I'm trying to thin my lips because my lips are not Caucasian standard. And that affected me for a good 5 years, up to 15, 16 years old. Why should a child be burdened with those kind of issues? So we need to I'm enjoying the fact that we're seeing such a humongous change, especially young mothers pushing for their children to remain and embrace their natural selves.
I've loved having both of you in studio. Thank you so much for coming in to talk to us. A big thank you to our guests, starting with our eNCA UK correspondent, Natalie Powell, for bringing us that story, the founder of Afro Botanics Ethnic Hair Care Products, Ndombenhle Kwatane, and Independent Schools Association of Southern Africa Executive Director Lebogang Montjane. More of your headlines after this break. You're watching Afternoon News.